So Bree, now that and I remember the spring very well, and I know it was deeply painful for everyone on the Bernie campaign, where it felt like it was this close, like right there, post Nevada, and then Jim Clyburn endorses Joe in South Carolina, and then the entire tide turns, and all the candidates um, uh, head a particular direction. So it's been 7, 8 months since then. You've now pivoted to become an independent voice, journalist. You're producing things that you believe in. What do you see as like the next number of steps for progressives, for trying to make some of these changes happen politically for yourself individually? I mean, you've had like a fascinating career already, and you're still just getting started. But like I look up and there are times when I'm very optimistic. There are times when I think that the mechanics of our system are just desperately broken, and when you start digging into some of these numbers, like an 18% approval rating for Congress and a 94% reelection rate, you're like, whoa, like how does that work? And then you start looking at mechanical fixes. One mechanical fix I've been pushing very hard is ranked choice voting in open
Absolutely.
primaries, which I think would make our politics much more dynamic and responsive and genuine. And
Yes.
then you couldn't bully everyone, being like, you're going to waste your vote, you're going to like elect the evil or whatever. It's
Yes.
like, well, if you're ranked choice voting, we don't need to worry about it anymore. So let's pursue true
Absolutely.
democratic reforms.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan, a huge advocate of ranked choice voting. The number one bully pulpit to your point that the Democratic Party has is if you don't vote for the lesser of two evils, you're going to make the evil win. And we have been operating on that logic since, realignment, and the Democratic Party became what it is today. And the Republican Party became the Southern strategy party of white racism that it emerged as. And we've been trying to struggle out of that since the 1960s, since the 1950s. And I raised this question, at this point, kind of infamously on our podcast in an episode with Noam Chomsky, where I simply asked, look, let's assume that Donald Trump presents a unique evil and we all have to vote him out this time. What do we do between now and 2024 to make sure we're not in this same situation? How do we get out of this lesser of two evilism structure? And if we are willing to pledge our votes to the Democratic Party, no matter what, under any circumstances, I thought Michael Bloomberg was a closer call in terms of who was worse with respect to Donald Trump, because he's a lot more capable and had actually enacted a much more extreme racial pogrom in New York City than Donald Trump managed, although he certainly tried, because Michael Bloomberg isn't incompetent, unlike Donald Trump. And people were, willing to vote for him. There were Donnie Joyce. People were saying they wouldn't vote for Bernie, but they would vote for Bloomberg if he was the eventual nominee. So, what authority do we have? What line in the sand is there? If Democrats are never willing to say enough is enough, this is not the kind of candidate we want representing us, this is not the kind of party we are. Is there any policy that they won't throw under the bus? Is there any kind of candidate that we won't accept? And if the answer is no, we should expect that the party moves more and more and more to the right over the course of history, the way it's been doing. So what's going to stop that movement? I think that ranked choice voting is one of those things. I think greater union participation and figuring out how to organize massive blocks of voters that can meaningfully and credibly threaten Democrats to say, we are going to withhold our vote. We are not going to mobilize our population unless you adhere to some basic standards, like the fact that 88% of Democrats want Medicare for all, but barely half of the House of Representatives will co-sponsor the bill. What? That like the idea people are arguing against force the vote who are like, well, it wouldn't pass anyway. That's not an indictment of the idea of force the vote. That's a colossal indictment of elected representatives, Democratic representatives in the House. We are in the middle of a global pandemic where 15 million people have just lost their employer-based health care. All of the people who are arguing if you like your health care, you can keep it during the primary election should be put on the mat by a journalist every single day asking, have you revised your position? Do you want to apologize for misleading the public and spreading right-wing talking points? Because none of that was true. And now you have to answer to 15 million Americans, 15 million, who in the middle of a global health crisis have no recourse with respect to paying for their health care. That's unconscionable. And yet we don't have a media apparatus who's willing to do that. And for people like you and those on the left who are willing to stand up and articulate some, break from consensus are ridiculed, called traitors to the party, accused of sexism or some other kind of identity-based bias. And there's no real reckoning at any point. So I do think that, yes, ranked choice voting needs to be pushed. Democrats will never do it because that's one of the main sources of their power, but we have to agitate for it. We need to start going to town halls, take a lesson out of the Tea Party's playbook, which was a lesson out of Saul Alinsky's playbook on the left, and make life uncomfortable for our elected representatives until they start actually representing us. And that goes for some of the people who have been progressive champions as well. It's not about throwing them out or saying they're terrible people or questioning their motives, but it's about understanding that there is a such thing as institutional creep. When you are in office, your motives start to change and you have an incentive in maintaining your status and your position. And you have all of these incentives to raise money and give money to the party so that you can get hierarchy and status within your committee positions and all of these kinds of things, which are important, but shouldn't come at the expense of the people that you were elected to represent. We need to give money to independent candidates so that they can rely on the people and be beholden to the people instead of being beholden to corporate interests. We need to push for campaign finance reform so they don't have the option to be dependent on corporate interests. And we all just have to stay a lot more engaged and have confidence, have faith, keep the faith that if we do these things and then we stand together and we recognize that it's not left, right, that it is top down, and the 99% stands together, it is possible for us to have a better world. It is possible, and we should not let pessimism cow us.
Oh, you're like the antidote to cynicism. I love it. anyone who needs a reminder of the fact that we can do great things. Bree's got a podcast every week with Virgil, Virgil's more of a downer than Bree. So
yes, we play a little bit of a yin yang, good cop, bad cop situation.
You're a very good team. So for you personally, I'm sure there was like a sense of depletion after the campaign, and then you've just gotten kind of your legs underneath you in terms of this new podcast and your new independent media project. Would the plan be to just keep on building your voice and work until like the next candidate catches fire and manages to get your attention?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I'm interested to see what happens electorally, but I'm also really interested to start to explore non-electoral activism. You know, there's been a little bit of a circular firing squad on the left this past week or two about force the vote. And to try to break out of that, I'm reaching out to union leaders and organizers to try to come on and give us a more concrete sense of how change happens. You know, a lot of left pundits like to say, well, your idea doesn't work because it really requires organizing and it requires grassroots support. I mean, like, that's great, but don't we play a role in helping to germinate that?
Can't we do that? Why not?
Right. Like, I'm not doing anything else. I'm just a podcaster. Let me call up the head of my local DSA. Let me write to my representative and see if she can get on the record on force the vote. You know, let me reach out to the Medicare for All advocates. Let me reach out to Black Lives Matter advocates. Let's see, what does it actually take to get 3,000 people standing in front of the Capitol? What does it take to organize a 1 million person march or the Women's March? Let me ask, some of the people in the campaign who did that.
This woman can do anything she does, Dave. It's beautiful.
Well, I haven't done it yet, but I think that we should be trying.
You will do. All of those things are very doable. One thing I want to just insert into this force the vote conversation, and this is something that a member of Congress informed me of that I was like, wow, that's freaking terrible. Is it's very hard to get any vote going on the floor because of something called the Denny Hastert rule, where you need the majority of the majority party to be on board to even introduce anything. Yes. So I want you all to imagine being first, let's say a minority legislator. So let's say you're a Democrat in the Senate or Republican in the House. You're like, well, I can't force a vote on a single thing because we're not a majority of the majority. And then I want you to imagine being a minority of the majority party where you also can't get a vote on anything because, you don't have, I suppose it would be, like 130 or 140 colleagues on board or whatever the number is. So that rule just strikes me as so terrible. Like, it just seems like such a dysfunctional body where it's literally like, if you have the majority, then you can actually advance things. And if you don't, you can't. And then you can just chill out. So
it incentivizes an action, which is why this opportunity, right? Because the speaker can bring a floor vote. The speaker, regardless of the numbers you've got can bring us floor vote.
Well,
And
the
that's-
speaker is the one that enacted this rule. That's not even a rule. It's like, it's like the speaker saying, well, I'm not going to do it unless the majority. So they clearly can do what they want.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
and
sorry.
it's aggregating party for herself, power rather for herself. All of it, so much of what we see in politics is that people get a little bit of power and they hoard it. We talked a lot about George Bush's overreach and expansion of executive power. And then Barack Obama came into office, and instead of dismantling it, once you get there, you're like, well, I'm the good guy. So it's good if I have power. So let me keep what was aggregated for me in the last administration and then get a little bit of more. And so what we get is increasingly individuals who are able to lord their preferences in a very anti-democratic way over the rest of us.
Which I'm going to suggest is particularly problematic when you're looking at a legislative body of hundreds of people. like that to me is like more
Yes.
problematic even. I mean, the executive abuses have their own, like separate category of problem. But I feel like in a legislative body, like hoarding it at that level just seems particularly egregious. Thank you for listening in. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you did, please do subscribe to Yang Speaks and click on notifications so we can let you know every time we have a new episode.